Okay, part two, continuing on. Why I think the Hamas protest around college campuses is government funded goons because they still hate the Jews. And so we're back, we're here at, in the 146 towns and villages. Um, Not a single Jew was left alive. In 1336, a movement arose in Germany that was based on the single fact of killing Jews. The members wore a short jacket of red leather and were called the Armleiter. Feeling themselves divinely motivated within the German understanding of Christianity, they massacred the Jews in almost 100 communities, most of them in Swabia and Alsace. This is before Nazi Germany. 12 years later, Europe was scourged by the disease remembered as a Black Death. You know, he believes it was Elohim's punishment on them for what they had done to the Yehudi people. The Jews were to a very large extent exempt from the disease, which naturally led to the conclusion on the part of the Germans that the Jews had caused the disease by poisoning the wells. Over 210 communities of Jews were utterly annihilated, and another 400 Jewish communities were attacked and suffered deaths. The total of how many thousands of Jews were murdered by the Germans during this sad time has never been precisely calculated. But this was the worst Holocaust of the Middle Ages, not to be equaled until Adolf Hitler turned the tools of modern science in the hands of the capable citizen to the same end. Pope Innocent V sanctioned the use of torture in 1252. The inquisitor was to be maintained by the property of the victim. His property was taken upon arrest. No defense was permitted, and the names of accusers, because I read that. But continuing on, a quemadero, or place of burning, was constructed just outside the Seville city walls. Let's see. The Spanish Inquisition here. Look at that. Can you imagine being burned to death? At the four corners, huge plaster figures of the four major prophets, Yehudim, had been erected. To ensure the maximum number of spectators for this horror show, the executions were performed on public holidays. The condemned Jews would be tied to a pyre of dry wood located well above the crowd to ensure a good view. When they were dead, the body was separated into pieces. The bones were broken and everything was thrown into a fresh fire. The Inquisition's prisons were crammed with people waiting to hear the charges against them, and they might be kept for years without knowing why. In the meantime, they and their families would have been stripped of all their property, for an arrest was always accompanied by the immediate confiscation of all the accused belongings, everything from the house down to the pots and pans. Whilst in prison, the accused's property could be sold off to pay for his maintenance in captivity. When eventually released, he would find himself bankrupt or destitute. The saffron or yellow cross was a forerunner of the Nazi yellow Star of David patches that the Yehudim under Hitler's reign of terror had to wear on the upper arms of all their shirt or coat sleeves to identify them as Yehudim. The yellow color derived from the Yehudim, who dealt a lot with the saffron herb and therefore had yellow stains on their hands. Just as a side bit. The Yehudim are a civilizing influence on nations. For instance, these were Jews who had lived and prospered under the previous 300-year rule of the Muslim Moorish Empire and had become an important and vital part of the Spanish society, just as they are in any society, until the Catholic Church came in, you know. And so that is. Also, let's not forget the pogroms or organized massacres against Yehudim in Russia, Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia under the auspices of the Eastern Catholic or Eastern Orthodox Christian Church. Pretty much the same as a Western Catholic or Roman Catholic Church, except they don't have a papacy with a pope residing at the Vatican, but instead have national patriarchs or archbishops. About 500,000 Yehudim were massacred by, now look at this, 500,000 Yehudim were massacred by Ukrainian nationalist Bohdan Chilinsky. I wonder if he's any relation to Chilinsky. You know, the Russians now call those Ukrainians Nazis, and I believe him. Oh, I believe him all the way. That little... In the 1600s, these were mostly Yehudim who had fled Hispania in the late 15th century. Tens of thousands of Jews were robbed, beaten, and raped. Poor people were burned in the shacks they lived in. Hundreds of them lay dead in the streets of their tiny villages. The Tsar is urging expelling Jews by the thousands from the larger towns and cities. Fiddler on the Roof. The movie is an excellent movie depicting the struggles of Yehudim living in 19th century Tsarist Russia. But don't think America was any better. By 1920, America was home to about 6 million Yehudim, about half the total number of Yehudim in the world. The anti-Yehudi Johnson Immigration Act of 1921 and 1924 halted the influx of Jews or Yehudim into the United States, and subsequently resulted in untold millions dying at the hands of the Nazis and Nazi sympathizers in Europe, because no nation, including America, would give them refuge. How Satan's crowning achievement in his quest to exterminate all of Elohim's chosen people off the face of the earth, the Nazi Holocaust, under the direction of Austrian Roman Catholic dictator Adolf Hitler. Yes, this monster was a Roman Catholic, as all Austrians are. The Nazis are responsible for the murders of over 6 million European and Soviet Yehudim in a span of about 12 years, 1933 to 1945. Okay. In 1933, during a meeting with Catholic Church officials, Hitler declared that he merely wanted, this is his reason, okay? That he merely wanted to do more effectively what the Church, the Catholic Church, had attempted to accomplish for so long, maintaining that his actions, the attempts to exterminate all Juden on earth, were service to a common cause. There he is, shaking the hands of a bunch of Catholic priests. Okay. And so it is. On the Christian now this is interesting. This April 1st. On the Christian holiday of April Fool's Day, April 1st, 1933, the Nazis encouraged a boycott of all Jewish-owned stores and businesses and Jewish goods. The Christian German citizenry needed little encouragement to boycott Jewish stores. But April the 1st, note, is also the day, the same day that Yeshua, the Son, rose from the dead. On May 10th, 1933, the Nazis began an assault of a different kind. In Berlin, an estimated 40,000 people watched as 5,000 German students, here we go, German college students. Got the students out now. Protesting at colleges. Over here, German students marched behind cars and trucks loaded with books. The students carried lit torches and they sang Nazi and college songs. The president of the student organization, wearing a Nazi uniform, declared that they had gathered to burn up German books. By the way, incidentally, recently in Canadian Parliament. They were literally saluting to a real live Nazi. As the books written by Jews and others were thrown into the fire, another student called out the names of the authors. Note: Sigmund Freud, Erich Maria Remarque, Heinrich Heine, Thomas Mann, Emma Ludwig, Albert Einstein, Jack London, Ernest Hemingway, Helen Keller. The crowd cheered Dr. Joseph Goebbels. Millions of books were burned. Now listen to this. A century before, Heinrich Heine, a German poet who was a Yehudi, wrote, "Where one burns books, one will in the end burn people." How prophetic Mr. Heine was, because 8 years after the Nazi book burnings, Jews were burned to death. Only 2 youth groups were allowed: the Hitler Youth for Boys and League of German Girls. Both groups taught children to spy and report on enemies of Nazism, including their own parents. And if we want to bump ahead here to this section in the book, what most people don't know about Homeland Security, the Nazification of Germany versus the Nazification of America, is what I'm getting to. My point is they are possible Nazis, and they still want to exterminate Jews, but aren't going to tell you that. But here we go. Under the compares the U.S. government's response to the 9/11 attacks and the process of German Nazification. Phase 1. Nazification of Germany. Seizure of power. Hitler appointed chancellor, even though the Nazi party represented only a small minority. On his first day as chancellor, Hitler dissolved the Reichstag and instituted the complete takeover of all governance and functions of the state, thus making Germany a totalitarian dictatorship. American Nazification. George Bush appointed president of the U.S. Supreme Court after massive election fraud perpetrated in Florida, in which thousands of voters were disqualified when Jeb Bush and his Secretary of State compiled a false list of felons who were then able to vote. Bush appoints convicted criminals, racists, and corporate-controlled underlings to his cabinet. Bush pushes tax cuts to the wealthy and begins his assault on the environment, and commands the FBI to stop investigations concerning the bin Laden family along with other terrorist cells. Phase 2 of German Nazification. Subdue the German people. Hitler was dining at Hermann Goebbels' apartment when the Reichstag caught fire and burned down. Hitler claimed the fire was a beacon from heaven and the beginning of a great epic in German history. Author Klaus Fischer believes the Nazis set the fire. Exactly one day after the fire in 1933, Chancellor Hitler invoked Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, which permitted the suspension of civil liberties in time of national emergency. If this sounds familiar, check current U.S. law. A decree by Hitler for the protection of the people and state abrogated the following protections or simply eliminated them: free expression and opinion, freedom of the press, right of assembly and association, right of privacy of postal and electronic communications. Go read my just recent video on are they now spying on our mail, and all the recent Atlanta Distribution Center, which was on the news and a Senate hearing over all of a sudden with a new system, nobody's getting their mail. Protection against unlawful search and seizures, individual property rights, states' right of self-governance. Hitler's supplemental decree created storm troops, specialty security federal police agencies. Now, Phase 2, American Nazification. Subdue the American people. It is postulated that the September 11, 2001 World Trade Center attacks were an inside job, planned and executed from within the federal government. Evidence of this has been found in numerous areas, one being large amounts of a substance called thermite found within the debris. To further prove this, numerous spheres of molten iron were identified using an electron microscope. Samples tested in a calorimeter produced graphs of huge, high, narrow peaks, indicative of being highly ignitable, whereas normal fires just burn over time and do not ignite. This is not to mention the other obvious signs from the photos and video of the buildings going down demolition style. Many engineers have come forward with evidence supporting the theory. Moving on here. One day prior to the attacks, it was announced that $2.3 trillion had gone missing from the Pentagon. The next day, the offices responsible for tracking that money down were also destroyed. Moreover, the only off-site backup for the missing money for black budgets was located in Building 7 of the World Trade Center. Building 7 also housed information about federal investigations involved in large-scale stock market and accounting fraud. Building 7 was the first to be cleaned up and evidence destroyed. That building was taken down the same day as the Twin Towers. There's even videos of it. Yeah. I don't know. No military aircraft were scrambled to intercept the 4 commercial airliners, even though there was plenty of time to do so. Cheney gave a stand-down order. No genuine investigation into the September 11 attack suggests a gigantic cover-up. Hundreds of suspects were immediately jailed without habeas corpus or other rights. Exactly one day after September 11th, Bush forced Congress to pass the Patriot Act without giving them time to even read it. This same Patriot Act has been proposed on several occasions, but it was never approved. The Patriot Act suspended civil liberties and abrogated the following constitutional protections: free expression of opinion, freedom of the press, right to assembly and association, right to postal and electronic communications, protections against unlawful search and seizure, individual property rights, states' right of self-governance. Sound familiar? Military forces to be used to monitor and control civilian populations, and presidential decrees made it possible for military forces to be used to monitor and control civilian populations, and abrogation of the Passe Comitatus Act. Now, Phase 3. German elections ended. Dictatorship begins. The Enabling Act of 1933 granted Hitler dictatorial power. Elections were no longer needed because the Fuhrer made all the decisions. Oh, have you noticed we're only down to the same 2 rotating clowns? Okay, Biden and Trump. Look at what Trump voted for. I'm not saying, I don't know for sure, but I don't trust him. He's the one that spent trillions on 5G installation, which is nothing more than a spy tool and a weapon. Russia has millions of documents of how dangerous that kind of microwave energy is. Even 4G now, cell phones are causing brain tumors out the wazoo. But do you think wireless is going to tell you? No! All they care about is money. That's their bottom line. Hitler regime established the first concentration camps, organized by Himmler. They held 5,000 prisoners, mostly communists, social democrats, and homosexuals. The Bavarian police guarded them until the SS took over. The slave labor camps were so hideous, the German people didn't want to hear about them, and became an efficient tool in silencing opponents of the Hitler regime. Dachau was a political camp and held the first Jewish detainees. Not surprisingly, the Jews were among the first vocal political opponents of the Nazis. Over 10,000 Jews from all over Germany were interned there, the Kristallnacht program. When the genocide of the Jews began, Jewish prisoners were deported from Dachau to extermination camps. Phase 3. America's Homeland Security Act becomes law. Beginning in 2000, the electronic voting process has taken away our right to have our votes counted. In Florida during this time, 94,000 people. I mean, I'm not sure about DeSantis. I like a lot of things he does, but Trump didn't even bother to show up for the debates, which I'm sure he would have lost to DeSantis. That's probably why. But doesn't even bother. And he's all these court hearings, and yet somehow, some way, that's who we're left with. Him and Biden. Creepy Biden. 94,000 people, over half of them black Americans, had their names added to a scrub list, which blocked from voting in the 2000 election. Florida never rectified the situation, even for the 2002 elections. Electronic touchscreen voting is the basis for electronic fraud. Think about it. Votes can easily be lost through software glitches. Duh. The Homeland Security bill was pushed through one day after September 11, which gave Bush dictatorial powers. Presidents may now make decisions without judicial or legislative restraints. The executive branch can now carry on its meetings in secret, without scrutiny from the press. Under Bush, there were countless news people that were arrested, which is totally against the Constitution. Homeland Security agents can now intrude in any part of the citizens' lives. An element slipped into the bill at the last moment. The Homeland Security law allows police to conduct internet and phone eavesdropping without asking for a court's permission. Yet recently, when they were trying to reinstate the, I don't know, I did a video, that spy bill, I forget which one it was. They were recently trying to get it extended, and they're on and say, oh, we have to have a warrant anyway. Really, that's not what this says. No. It also requires internet service providers to share subscribers' records with law enforcement, thus overturning previous legislation which outlawed the practice. The Homeland Security Awareness Office will be run by a former convicted felon. 850,000 jobs were privatized, knocking out union or civil service oversight. In 2002, Senator Byrd spoke out vehemently against the bill, calling it Bush's grab for dictatorial power and the worst tyranny he had seen during his 50-year tenure in Congress. In a revealing admission in 1997, the Director of Resource Management for the U.S. Army confirmed the validity of a memorandum relating to establishment of civilian labor camps. Congressman Henry Gonzalez said, "We have standby provisions in the name of terrorism prevention under which the military can arrest Americans and put them in detention camps." In its quest for war in Iraq, Bush sent 250,000 troops to the Middle East. 265,000 National Guard personnel will be called to active duty. Most of the National Guard will be deployed in the United States. One wonders if Bush was at war with Iraq or America. And then, and not to mention, if you look at my other video, Weather Weapons and Homeland Security Part 1 and 2. Homeland Security now owns your weather. They're involved in illegal weather modification and chemtrails. And it's real. It's not a conspiracy theory. In fact, the state of Tennessee just banned chemtrails in their state. Surveillance is a huge element of the DHS, and without that agency, we could still rely on the CIA, FBI, NSA, etc. Ending the DHS would at least eliminate one of the numerous agencies which spy on American citizens. Almost every mandate of the DHS has a surveillance component, and the American Civil Liberties Union has accused various components of DHS with civil rights violations, from laptop searches to behavior profiling. And then you've got $64 million to test the DHS, to test the effect of geoengineering on hurricanes. And I'll end with this. Back in, this has been going on since the 40s, 50s. That's on that other video, Weather Weapons and Homeland Security. They increased the strength of a hurricane, and it slammed into the coast of Savannah, Georgia, causing a lot of damage. Back in, I believe, the 50s, Congress held a moratorium and said, no more, you're not allowed to do any weather modification. But yet they are. They're rammed it up, and they're doing it all over the place. X's and tic-tac-toe in the sky. But, back to my video. My theory is these college protests are state-sponsored, and They are moving on with their plan. They hate the Jews. They want to exterminate them all. I think. I don't know. But it just doesn't, it's not jiving with me. And that's all I got to say in this video. Over and out.